7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hi, and welcome to the Marketing Essentials podcast. Our unique team helps small businesses grow by providing essential marketing expertise.
Hi, and welcome to the Marketing Essentials podcast. My name is w.parmentier of w.parmentier Photography.
I'm Justin Kerr of Justin Kerr Design.
And I'm Alicia Piazza with Custom Marketing Solutions.
And together we make up
The Marketing Essentials team.
And today with us we have a special guest, Mr. Rich Austin. How are you today, sir?
I'm well, thank you very much.
So, I guess we should start off by letting you have a couple of seconds to give us a brief introduction of who you are and what you do.
Okay, sure. Well, I have a company called Speaking of Success, and I help with communication skills. I help and coach and have workshops in things like public speaking and presentations. I've always had an interest in speech and an interest in communications. I've been a severe stutterer all of my life, and then as an adult, I finally went through 2 or 3 years of fairly intensive speech therapy, and I had some other speech issues as well that I had to get ironed out, and then I became sort of my own speech therapist. And to any speech therapist out there, I love you guys, you're great. But I've worked on my speech all the time. So after a fairly mediocre career in corporate life, I moved on to Speaking of Success, and I love what I do.
Awesome.
So that I've known you for a little while through networking events, and I've known about your Speaking of Success, but now that I've heard a little bit of your story, that name now has a lot more significance to it. You know, the fact that you were successful in overcoming, a speech issue, and not only made yourself successful, but now you help other people be successful.
So you caught on to that. Good.
I did, yeah.
Nice.
It takes me a little while because
Most people don't.
I'm not the fastest knife in the drawer, but
or the sharpest.
Yeah. No, I was just making Alicia think for a minute.
Yeah, I like this. Anybody that picks on Justin, all right.
Yeah, because usually we pick on you.
This is true. So it's taking some of the stress off of me today. So that's
I do. Before we dive in, I do want to ask one question since you brought up speech therapy. So, famous movie, King's Speech. I'm assuming you've seen it.
No.
Oh, you haven't?
No. Actually, one of the odd things is if I'm around other stutterers, makes me very uncomfortable.
Oh, okay.
And I think it's an emotional thing because I understand what they're going through.
Sure.
And so I haven't really had an interest in seeing it.
All right. Well, the reason I was asking was I wanted to get your take on the authenticity of the methods that particular speech therapist used for the King. But since you haven't seen it, I guess we'll skip that question.
All right. Okay.
threw you off there, huh, Justin?
Yeah. I'm batting 0 for today so far.
Well, okay. Like I said, it's usually me, so I'll take that. As Justin said in the intro, that Rich is going to talk about storytelling for business and how you get noticed in the age of distraction. So it's an interesting title. Getting noticed in the age of distraction. Mm-hmm. What went into that as far as what was the catalyst for you using that title?
Well, as you guys well know, with social media and all of the assault, if you will, daily of thousands of pieces of information coming at us every day. And how does the brain figure out what's important? How does the brain figure out what it should pay attention to when it's getting emails and tweeted at and instant messages and the Facebook thing and all of those things coming at you? It's so distracting that your message has to stand out for others to pick up on it and understanding. And of course, storytelling is probably the best way for a message to resonate.
Sure. We've talked quite extensively on this podcast about storytelling and the importance of it. So when you said you wanted to kind of put this talk around storytelling, I was excited to hear it, because I always love to hear what other people's takes on storytelling is. So you basically sent us a few bullet points ahead of time, and some pretty cool things here, so I'm going to bring one of them up. Let's start with the first one, where it says, why do we tell stories?
Well, we've been telling stories ever since man figured out that he was he, that I am, the great I am, that man realizes he's separate and he's going to die. And suddenly, he had to make sense of that.
Sure.
How do I understand that in the grand scheme of things? And making up and retelling stories, whether they're fictional or historical events like the hunt or whatever, helped early man understand and accept their environment. And then, of course, through thousands of years, storytelling was the main form of communication. And the human brain is actually hardwired to interpret, understand, and remember stories.
Very good. So the next part of that is, so when people listen to stories, we're wired to hear stories. What happens to a person when they're hearing a story? What is the listener going through when they're hearing a story?
Yeah, it's interesting. Most people, and my discussion here is about storytelling for business. And if you've ever tried to sell something to a person in business, every person you're talking to has one thing in common: they're stressed. Business is hard, especially if you're a small business owner.
Sure.
And stress produces stress hormones, and they make you irritable, they make you short-tempered, intolerant, critical. Your memory doesn't work as well when you're under stress. So tell me how that works when you're trying to convince them to buy something from you. You're already at a huge disadvantage.
Sure.
So if you can set the tone, essentially set the brain chemistry, set the mood in the room by relating a story, by getting them involved and emotionally attached to what you're saying, then the brain chemistry starts shifting over to releases of different hormones that make you feel good. They actually make you pay attention more. They actually make you remember what the person is saying. And in any business situation, that's what you want. You don't want the irritable individual who's just waiting for you to get out. You want the person who is hanging on what you're saying and remembering and feeling emotionally involved.
So can storytelling be both for a business, can it be both like a marketing and sales tactic kind of combined in one?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
Like I was working with a young woman who she sells life insurance. Okay, not that exciting, but she was very good at it. So her company asked her to speak to 300 other agents. And she came to me and said, I'm not really sure how to inspire them. I'm not really sure what to do. And in our conversation, she mentioned the word legacy. And a lot of times it only takes one word. And so we got together and we came up with a true story where when she got in front of this group, she started by telling them that in 1888, there was a gentleman riding in his carriage going to work in Stockholm, Sweden. And he was reading the newspaper. And he read his own obituary. which sort of startled him because he wasn't dead.
Sure.
And the newspaper had gotten it wrong, obviously, but it was his brother that had passed away. But they thought it was him. And in the article, they referred to him as the merchant of death.
Oh, boy.
Oh, okay.
And he didn't like that legacy. He didn't like what he was leaving behind. So he instructed his driver to turn the carriage around and go to the office of his attorney, where Albert Nobel, the inventor of dynamite, created the Nobel Peace Prize because he wanted to change his legacy.
Sure.
And as insurance agents for this insurance company, our job is to help our clients create a legacy.
Nice.
And when she went on to explain that, suddenly you have 300 people there who suddenly feel noble
Sure.
about selling insurance.
Yeah, I see what she did there.
So stories can, stories can really change people's perspective.
Sure. Sure.
Right. So you're not just selling a product, you're now selling a legacy.
Right.
Or a service, I guess,
Right.
or whatever you call life insurance. But that's a really good example.
And it doesn't have to be a long story. There was an interesting, and it may be true, it may not be, but it's attributed to Ernest Hemingway, and they asked him to write as short a story as he could. And Bill, you're nodding your head.
I
You
think
probably
I
heard
vaguely
this, right?
remember, yeah.
So he wrote a 6-word story: for sale, baby shoes, never worn.
Yep, I remember that.
And just those 6 words, everybody who hears that immediately has a picture and a story
Sure.
coming into their heads. So if you do it well, write it well, hit the right emotional keys, a story doesn't have to be War and Peace.
Sometimes that's actually a deterrent. If it's too long a story, you lose
Exactly.
people halfway through it.
And I think like when business owners hear like, oh, I have to write a story for my business, it just becomes like a daunting task because they think it's this huge ordeal. But when you sit down with a professional, they can help you kind of craft it or pull it out, and it doesn't have to be, like you said, a book.
Right.
And the other nice thing about a story is you don't feel like you're being sold to.
Right.
When the story's being told, you're listening, and it doesn't feel like, oh, here comes the hard sell, or,
Right, right.
which turns a lot of people off.
We may have talked about this in the other podcast, but one of the things that I've heard recently on the radio, Cardi's, they're famous for their, billboards, radio commercials, TV commercials.
Sure.
But they recently had a radio spot on, and they were selling dining room tables. And the way they started the commercial was they took you back to remembering when you would sit around the table for dinner time with your family, and you'd tell each other, what went on in your day, and you'd sort of reconnect at the end of the day, and it was this family event. And oh, by the way, we have these dining room tables on sale for, and I just thought it was, it took me right back,
Right.
to, childhood. And it was a great way to, like you said, disengage the cynical and irritable part of my brain and engage me in different ways so that I was more receptive to what they were marketing. And it probably took all of like 15 seconds, to do that, but it was really well done. Now you were talking, we were starting to talk a little bit about business and how to tell a good story for sales and marketing. So what's the process that you'll go through with a client to sort of take them on that journey? Where they come in, they're like, okay, I need some help in marketing my organization using storytelling. How do you help them? What's the process?
Well, of course, for everybody, it's a little bit different. But first thing that we have to determine is, do they know, and you guys are very familiar with this, do they know who their customer is? And it's amazing how many people have no idea. They start out the conversation with anybody who,
Yeah, like the chiropractor, anybody with a spine. It's like,
Right.
that's too broad.
Right. Now, unless you're a undertaker, you can't say everybody's my customer. Okay. Other than that, you have to start narrowing it down. So the first thing that I do when I work with folks is we make sure we understand they know who their customer is, and sometimes we actually have to narrow it down in the initial conversation. Yeah, if you're selling real estate, everybody's not your customer. Everybody doesn't want to own a home. Everybody can't afford a home. Everybody isn't in a lifestyle where they want a home. So you have to start narrowing it down. So that's first thing we do is find out who they're talking to. And then we actually get into the storytelling. And you want to make sure that it's emotional, but the word that I always like to use is relevant. Is the story you're telling relevant to the people you're trying to reach? If you're trying to sell African safaris, that's a pretty narrow marketing niche. And
Yeah, I'd say.
it's not going to be relevant to a lot of people. So you really have to narrow it down. So as long as you know who your customer is and the relevance of what you're going to be talking about, then you want to start building the story. And any typical story, you have to have a hero, if you will, a protagonist. And as I've heard you folks mention, that's usually the customer.
Yep.
It can be the company. But, well, give you a great example. Apple Computers, 1984, they did a memorable advertisement, a story with no words. It showed a auditorium full of people just staring at a screen blankly. And this woman comes running down the aisle with a giant sledgehammer and swings it over her head and throws it into the screen and shatters it and breaks everybody's funk, everybody's concentration. And it was Apple's way of saying, this is 1984, but this isn't 1984. And it was a great story, and Apple knew who they were speaking to. So in that case, Apple was the protagonist. So it can be the company, but it has to be, again, relevant.
Can a business have multiple stories, or is there one main story that a business should have as part of their marketing?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think any business can have multiple stories. I usually work with small to medium-sized businesses that don't have dozens and dozens of different divisions and products and that sort of thing. So it's important, if you're talking about your mission, that's one story. But if you're talking about trying to, and relate it back to the business model, you're trying to get somebody to purchase your product or your service, then you really have to have a story based on that. And the story would consist of talking about a relevant problem that you know this potential customer has or is going to have. And then talking about how the person in the story tried to fix this problem and it didn't work. And then they got in deeper. And then you talk about how they realized they need to have something different. And that's when you step in with the different thing, with the solution. And then they work with your service, with your product, and their solution, their problem is solved because of what you brought to the table. And then the story ends, the story arc is completed when they understand the story you just told them is relevant to what their problem is or what problem they might run into.
So that basically brings the potential customer, right into where you want them, basically.
Right.
Now you've taken that stress away, you've calmed them down, you've gotten them into a place where they're receptive, and you basically, for lack of a better word, you get them on the hook at that point. I don't even necessarily want to say that, but...
Yeah, because what you've done is you've created the situation where suddenly you're telling them a problem somebody else has, and they recognize themselves in that story, in that problem, and they realize, oh, gee, yeah, that could be me. What if that happens? And then you actually get them thinking, what would I do? And then you tell them what somebody else did, and it didn't work. And so they're now involved because, well, how does it turn out? Because how is it going to turn out for me? And then you bring in your solution, and they realize, oh yeah, that makes sense. I could do that. And so you've brought them full circle.
In a much, that's a terrific process, and in a much less subtle way, the late night commercials that sell these kitchen gadgets.
Oh, the infomercials?
They use a similar pattern. It's like, are you tired of peeling potatoes? Are you tired of spending hours in the kitchen? And you're sitting there, because it's, 12:30 night, you're going, yeah. And so by the time they get done asking all these questions, you're ready to buy whatever it is.
That's like have you seen the one where the guy that cuts the boat in half and then puts that seal? He's got I forget what the name of the product is, but it's this silly seal that basically is supposed to seal anything. It's like a rubber coating.
Yeah.
And he literally cuts the boat, an aluminum boat in half, and then puts the seal tape, and then goes out on the water with it. Now
that's a really narrow audience, because how many people out there have cut their boat in half and are wondering, how am I going to get this back together?
Well, at this table.
Yeah, not one. Well, the reality of it is it was showing how it was versatile enough that it could be used about anything.
Right.
He actually used it underwater at one point and slapped this stuff onto the side of a bucket that had water and stopped the leak underwater, and it was pretty cool. But it was one of those things, much like what you're talking about. It's like, yeah, I need that. I don't know what I need it for, but I need that.
Yeah. Well, it's, it is a similar model, just not very subtle. It's
right.
Kind of hitting you over the head with it, but
yeah, but if you don't have a lot of time, subtlety is hard.
This is true. Yeah.
True. Now, you've helped them determine, okay, who your audience is. You've helped them develop a story that is going to be successful in reaching that audience. What's the next step after that? Do you advise them in regards to, okay, here's the channels where you should be marketing this story? Do you take them into that, or do you?
No. I would say talk to somebody, I don't know, maybe customized marketing solutions. Something like that.
There's a plug for you, Alicia.
That was very subtle.
Subtle, yes.
That's a great question, though. Like, how do you get your story across to people? And
Oh, yeah. No, yeah, that's absolutely. Mm-hmm. And I freely admit that that's not what I do.
Yeah. But, and then you have a great point coming up on the list here, why millennials need to hear stories, and can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Not being a millennial myself.
What?
I thought you were a young millennial.
Yes. I'm an ancient millennial.
Yeah.
I'm the sage millennial. But everything that I have read and researched, millennials grew up with the internet. They grew up in the age of distraction, if you will, where everything is advertised to them constantly. Mm-hmm. And they just don't believe it. They've seen so many people get burned. They know that pretty much everything they hear isn't going to work like they say it's going to work. That great app that's going to solve all your problems, it doesn't solve all all of your problems. It doesn't do what it's supposed to do. And, oh, by the way, by the time it arrives in the mail, unless you've got Amazon Prime, it's obsolete. So they don't really buy into traditional marketing, traditional advertising. They want to feel involved. They want to feel like they are relevant. And with the millennials, it's all about storytelling. It's all about forgetting about the traditional marketing where you tell them the specifications and all of the things about the product, because they're not going to believe you anyways. Forget telling them what the product is made of and the specifications and all that, and tell them how the product is being used to solve somebody else's problem or to make somebody else's life better.
Yeah.
And that's what millennials want to hear.
I think a good example of that is Tom's Shoes. You know, when you read their marketing and you see their marketing, you know very little about the shoes. What you do know is that for every pair of shoes you buy from them, they're going to give a pair of shoes to someone who needs a pair of shoes, in a third world country.
Right.
And that's what sells the shoes.
And
not that they're,
Double stitched, or they have an extra tongue.
Yeah,
or
nobody cares.
Whatever. Yeah.
And
Right.
people are actually willing to spend a little bit more money on them too, because they're not the cheapest shoes around either.
No, you
Right.
can get like similar ones at like a Walmart, but they're not Tom's. They don't have that Tom's logo.
Exactly.
And you just told their story in like one sentence. I mean, if you go to their website, they have videos that go in more depth about the story and make you, they draw you in. But that initial story is what you just said, Justin. That's a very
Right. And now
concise
if you
story.
have a pair of Toms on, you're part of that tribe. I don't know what if you have them on
I don't
today.
have my Tom's on today.
But you're part of that tribe,
Yeah.
and when somebody else sees it, like, oh, you're involved in that too. You care about that too, and it makes both of you part of that story.
And
Right.
it just brings the story further along to everybody
Yeah.
else. It's great.
And that it creates that fandom. Like fandom is a popular word in marketing now because people will
Yeah, they've got
not
away
just
from the
buy
word viral, right?
Yeah, viral so 2010. I don't know.
Wow.
But fandom, people don't just buy one pair of Toms. They'll often
Buy
have
multiple,
like
sure.
3-4 pairs and seasonal, and yeah, that's how they go. So, going back, Rich, to your title of your podcast, getting noticed in the age of distraction in millennials, like you said, they're coming up to be a huge buying power within the population, and storytelling is important for them because it sets companies apart. But I also just think it cuts through like the noise, the digital
Cuts through all the
noise.
distraction, right?
Yeah, there's
Right.
so much out there right now. When you pick up your phone and you're hit with ads, you turn on a podcast and there's ads in between and
You don't
everything.
have to even pick up your phone. It just
Right.
calls
No,
to you.
I mean,
Yeah.
and the reality is, we've talked about it in the past here, is the stuff that's going to come to the top is going to be those stories, whether it be through a video, oral retelling of a story. That's how you're going to cut through all that noise as far as, the millennials are being bombarded thousands of times a day.
Yeah.
And a lot of the stuff, I mean, even I'm not a millennial, and I find myself on my phone, I'll be looking at something, scroll past that, don't even give it a second look,
Right.
because it doesn't catch my attention right off the bat.
And I think a lot, so this is like something I deal with a lot, and I do talk about lead generation for businesses, but it's almost like business, and it's one of my pet peeves, but businesses think that because of digital, they can bypass the fundamentals of marketing and just go directly to generating leads.
Yeah, it doesn't work that way.
It doesn't. Nope.
No.
And if you do want to do lead generation, you have to go back to your fundamentals of knowing things like your mission statement, your brand, but your story can be your top of funnel.
Right.
Because
Absolutely.
it's not a hard sell and it draws that person in.
Absolutely.
It makes
Right.
it relatable, relevant.
I mean, the platform, digital, it's just a tool.
Yeah.
If you don't know your why,
Yeah.
then it doesn't matter what tool you use. You're not sending an effective message.
And people are more and more cynical nowadays that they don't want to hear the hard sell. They
Yeah.
don't, I know for myself, the minute I hear somebody pushing the hard sell, it's like flip the channel or scroll past it or ignore it, because Who wants to deal with that? I mean, and the millennials even more so. They don't want to be sold to. They really don't. Not that anybody does, but
No, they just want to binge watch on Netflix.
well, that's true too. Yeah.
You can even skip the intro now on Netflix.
Yes.
Shows.
I don't have Netflix.
Save
I'm still
yourself
behind the time.
that 8 seconds.
Great. And so, but like, if you want to
Beginning of
skip
the
the intro of a show, like, how likely are you to pay attention to an ad that's just like, bye, bye,
Okay.
bye?
How cynical have I gotten? I don't know if any of you have noticed, those of you who are on Facebook. A lot more videos that are being shown on Facebook, if they're a little bit longer, for 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes, are starting to have an
Ads.
ad midway through it.
YouTube.
I hit that ad and I'm scrolling. I don't even catch the second half of the video. That's how cynical I've become.
But I guarantee you that some people, and this happens on YouTube, if it's a longer video, you'll get an ad in the middle.
Yeah.
I guarantee you some people are driven to, you know what, I'm just going to buy the subscription.
Just leave me alone.
So they'll leave me alone. And it's like,
I guess
it's
you-
a sales model. It's like,
not
hey,
one I like,
if you don't
but
want to put up with the ads, pay us so much a month.
So, I guess like going back to millennials and them needing to hear the story, can any type of business cut through the noise and reach, maybe it is millennials, maybe it's not millennials as their demographic, but like, can any type of business tell a story, Rich?
I guess the better question is there a business that you would say you'd have a hard time coming up with a story for?
Well, I was in Westfield, Mass. the other day, and that's called the Whip City because they used to make a buggy whips.
Really? I've been there. I've been to Westfield.
Yes. So that would be a tough company.
Hard to sell buggy whips nowadays?
Not, well, you couldn't sell them for the original purpose anyway.
And
Well, yeah, there's probably some lateral markets that you could tap into.
yeah, we'll let our listeners come to their own conclusion on that one.
Well, I mean, the millennials have latched on to a lot of what we would consider antiquated things. They brought
Retro,
back
right?
vinyl.
They have
They're very
typewriters.
much typewriters.
Polaroids. Don't forget the Polaroids.
Right.
Hipsters
So, I mean,
love their
they
Polaroids.
might end up bringing buggy whips back. Who knows?
You never know. Well, wow, I think, can you imagine a half an hour has already flown by already?
Yes, I can imagine because I've been watching the clock.
Yeah, so I think Rich has like a couple other points that are pretty important, but like what, I guess, let's see, defining your we went
Maybe
through a
it's
good
some
amount
way
of
of
material, but
summing up
Yeah, I was gonna
what
say-
we
Yeah.
talked about the last 30 minutes. How would you give us a synopsis?
Well,
This is the point where we put you on the spot.
no pressure.
Well, basically, a story is critical to get a customer involved in your product, involved in your service. You're not going to be able to get their attention if you're just advertising at them. And so, in today's age, if you can't, as Alicia said, if you can't cut through all of the interference, if you're part of that background noise, you don't have a chance. The only way you're going to get in front is with a story that grabs their attention, makes them think, and makes them understand and want to get involved.
Great. So, to wrap this up, if somebody wanted help in crafting their specific story, how would they get in contact with you?
Oh, well, they could send me a email, info@speakingofsuccess.us, or they could call me, area code 401-413-2565.
Great. We'll also put those in the show notes so that way anybody that wants to go back and contact you.
I'm going to be having a workshop probably slated for October 30th.
Oh, great.
And, there'll be more more information coming on that.
Great. When you get that information to us, we'll get into the show notes and
Great.
try to pop that out.
Great,
Well,
thank
thank you for joining us today. We appreciate you
Oh, it was
coming
great.
and checking with us.
I had fun. Thank you.
And now it's time for a little bit of a shameless plug on our side.
Absolutely.
Justin, take it away.
Well, you can find the Marketing Essentials team on the web at marketingessentialsteam.com. And we have all of our past episodes listed there on our site. There's also a contact form if you want to reach out to us directly. And we also have a private Facebook group for people who are interested in marketing.
Oh, that's the exclusive group.
It's the exclusive group.
Gotcha.
It was very difficult to get in, just ask Rich.
Did we let him in yet?
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's a great place if you are a small business owner and you want to just have a place where you can go and get some marketing support and ask some questions and talk to other people who have similar interests. So you can find that on Facebook at Little Roadie Marketing Support Group.
And then, of course, we have our Facebook page and from a blank here all of a sudden. Also, if you're interested, if you're one of those people that likes to listen on the go, we have our Apple Podcast.
Yep.
Which is Marketing Essentials Team. Mm-hmm. And you can subscribe to that and get all of our previous podcasts and also get notified when the next one comes out. I think with that, I think that's all we've got for today.
Yep.
I guess it's time to say bye. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.